9. Millions of us were wiped out when the seas rose and engulfed Commando. We survived as a species because we were willing to think the unthinkable. Some genetic characteristics helped us survive the starvation and overcrowding, and some did not. And there was no room for sentiment or for weaklings. We culled, we refined, we selected. The prospects of extinction forged us into the species we designed ourselves to be. The purest expression of the Communion spirit, and at a level of social maturity that weaker mongrel species will never attain, because they lack the courage to cull. We are the masters of genetics, and sole arbiters of our fate, never to be at the mercy of chance again. Draft memos of former chief scientist Kosai on Communion eugenics and the desirability of the caste system, never published. Yacht City, Gaftica, Outer Rim, 477 days after Geonosis. The bodies of the two cover ops troopers were much heavier than Darman expected. The wait for Nina and Phi to show up, 2 hours, was the longest of his life, and never creak and click made him think that yet police were surrounding the apartment. When his brothers finally arrived, he felt inexplicably guilty, as if he had to explain himself. Nina stood, staring down at the two troopers. "Have you tidied them up, Daw?" Darman had done his best. Apart from the damage to the one he'd shot in the face, they both looked quite peaceful now. They looked like him, but dead, and he was having a hard time dealing with that. Their arms were neatly at their sides, legs straight. I felt bad leaving them lying around like meat. "What are we going to do with them?" Phi shrugged. "Can't leave them here as air fresheners." "Phi, they're our own." Darman couldn't bear looking at the faces any longer, and grabbed a blanket from the bedroom. "We have to dispose of them properly." "We've got their armor," Phi said. "Sergeant Cal will want the tallies. He's funny about that." "Okay, let me put it another way. What if that was your carcass lying there? What would you want done with it?" "I want someone to shake their head and say, 'What a waste of such a fine-looking and stylish young man,' and then give me a big state funeral," Phi said, taking the blanket out of Darman's hands and rolling one of the covert ops troopers in it, with loads of women weeping that they never had the chance to sample my charms. But apart from that, I wouldn't give a moth's backside by then, would I? It's just a temporary shell. Only the armor lasts." Nina sneaked a glance out of the window. "It'll be dark in an hour or so. We'll take them back to camp and bury them. Dispose of the armor somewhere remote. And tell the lizards not to dig them up and eat them. Daw, merits don't eat other sentients, just their own dead." "Oh, that's all right then." "Daw, these guys tried to kill you." "No, they came for Soul, Sarge. And that's just what you were ready to do not so long ago, remember." Darman had no problem killing. It was his job. He'd grown used to it, and he didn't even get the bad feelings and nightmares afterwards that they said humans usually had. But he killed his own comrades, not an enemy. The circumstances didn't make him feel any better. I don't think I could ever go after my own like that, no matter what. Not unless it was personal and they'd done something terrible to me. He realized he was blathering. Even if I gave him an odd look. Nina bundled the second trooper into a blanket, and Damian helped him. The dead trooper's muscles hadn't stiffened yet. And when Damian bent one of them over, the movement forced the air from the man's lungs. He emitted a distressing sighing noise that made him sound as if he'd come back to life. Damian had seen some unpleasant things in battle, but that moment was seared into his memory as one he knew he'd never forget. By the time the bodies were trussed with fiber cord, they could have passed for lumpy carpets in bad lighting. Aiden's been told that the assault on Iat is probably going to be in a week's time, Nina said, seeming unconcerned. So it wouldn't matter if we left them here. No, we bury them. Okay, I mean it. Duh, am I arguing? It would have made more sense to run. The longer they waited here, the more at risk they were. It wasn't hot outside, and with the environment controls in the apartment turned right down and the windows sealed, it might have been a couple of weeks before the neighbors smelled that anything was amiss. But that wasn't good enough, even if they had been sent to shoot Sol. Vi wandered into the kitchen. The conservator door sighed open and then shut again. He came out with a plate of food in one hand and a single fritter cake in the other, which he held up to Damian. Eat, he said. Go on, or I'll sulk. Damian accepted the cake and chewed, but it stuck in his throat like sawdust. He had an urge to call Etain. It was the first time he'd ever felt the need to seek comfort from someone outside rather than from his immediate circle of brothers. And it made him feel disloyal, as if their reassurances and support were no longer enough for him. You should talk to Calbia, Nina said quietly. He killed the Commando by accident, remember. He probably knows better than anyone what you're going through. I'm not going through anything, Damian suddenly felt transparent and exposed. I'm just getting jumpy, waiting for the cops to show up. How nobody heard the blast noise, I'll never know. The place is well insulated, Vi said gently. Pretty well soundproof, except for the floors creaking. Damian knew he wasn't fooling anyone, and retreated to the kitchen to wait for darkness, on the pretext of clearing out the cupboards. Yes, he talked to Scarata. Whatever Cal had been through was worse. He shot a commando in training during a live fire exercise, one of his own boys, and even though everyone knew accidents like that happened, Scarata was never the same afterward. It had to be much, much harder to live with causing the death of someone you cared about. The covert ops troopers were relative strangers. But Damian had heard that ARC troopers were ready to kill clone kids, rather than let Sep forces take them during the attack on Commando. Not for their own good or to save them from anything, but to deny them as assets to the enemy. Would Sola have hesitated to kill a brother clone who got in his way? Daman doubted it. It was all getting too blurred and messy lately. He longed for the good old days, when the enemy was just tinnies and very easy to spot. Okay, let's make a move, said Nina. Nina brought the speeder right up to the front of the apartments. So that was what had taken 2 hours. Then occurring more transport. And they moved the bodies like rolls of carpet. A few people were about on the street on the street, but they took no notice. Probably thinking someone was moving house. Then Fi went to collect Daman's speeder, while Nina and Daman waited in the vehicle, with the bodies in the back. It was just a simple drive back to the camp. Daman felt he could manage that, and began fretting about digging graves in the dark. He certainly didn't plan to leave the corpses overnight. He had an image of the Merits making a stew out of them, and it wasn't funny at all. It disturbed him in a way he hadn't thought possible, making his mouth fill with unwelcome saliva as if he was going to vomit. But he had to hold it together long enough to work with the lizards until the assault on Yet began. Nice strong cup of calf when we get back, Nina said. His voice had every single intonation that Skrata did. All reassurance and concern. You'll be okay, Da. What if they weren't actually going to kill me? I never waited to find out. Sarge, do you suppose they'd just come to arrest Sol? No, Nina said firmly. They came to execute him. And even if they'd arrested you, they'd only have been taking you back to so someone else could kill you. So stop replaying the whole of it in your head and accept it was them or you, Novakera. Sometimes Daman thought that he alone knew what was going on in his mind. And then one of his brothers would tell him exactly what he was thinking. Unbalanced, exposed, or not. He was more comforted to know he wasn't alone or going crazy. They drove out of town with Daman occasionally directing Nina, who was working from the holochart in his datapad. Vi followed behind in the other speeder. It was all going fine. Fine under the circumstances, anyway. Until the red and green strobing lights of the local law enforcement patrol vehicles shot past them. He's in a hurry, said Nina. Late for his calf break. That was what Captain Obram always said when he saw one of his CSS speeders misbehaving. Daman glanced in the rear view to check that Fi hadn't dropped too far behind. Doesn't look like they get too much trouble in this place. Not exactly the lower levels of 000. Everywhere's got its lower levels, Star. He felt that if he kept chatting like a normal person, everything would be alright. He thought that right up to the moment when the police speeder braked and came to a halt. The illuminated matrix between its rear jets flashing a single word. Stop. Usyk, Nina muttered. I think he means us. Tell me this isn't stolen, Nervad. It's not. And we're not over the speed limit either. Nina slowed down. Darman could see Fi dropping farther behind to stop outside a tap calf. Now, nice and calm, Nina said. Let's hope he thinks we are twins. How many folks know what clones look like anyway? Especially here. Nina activated the comlink deep in his ear by clicking his back teeth. Darman felt his own embedded earpiece vibrate for a moment as it started receiving the signal. Then Nina lowered the side view port and put on his sensible but blank expression as the red uniformed officer walked up to the speeder with one hand on the blaster at his belt. Good evening, officer. What's the problem? Keep your hands where I can see them, sir, and show me what you've got in the back. The officer leaned slightly to stare at Darman. You, step out of the vehicle and put your hands on the roof. For a moment, Darman thought Nina was going to throw the door open and knocked the guy down. But he gritted his teeth and popped the rear hatch. Fi's voice filled Darman's skull. He's on his own, Dar. I can drop him from here. Wait. Darman got out of the speeder slowly and left the door open for rapid retreat. But he edged far enough down the length of the speeder to keep an eye on Nina. The officer leaned into the small cargo space at the back of the speeder, still keeping his hand on the butt of his blaster, as if it was some comfort to him. He didn't seem to realize that turning his back on a suspect, two suspects in fact, was risky, and Darman looked hard to see if he had some headset linking him to another officer nearby. But there was nothing. He was simply not used to dealing with serious criminals or commandos. Had a report of a speeder being used to remove items from a residence, sir, the officer said. His voice was muffled as he leaned in, one hand taking some of his freight on the tailgate. This one, in fact. Now, what do you reckon you've got here? The moment the cop moved his hand to the tightly wrapped body in the cargo area, his fate was sealed. It was almost as if they'd drilled for it. Nina jumped him and pinned him flat, face down, arm locked, around his throat to silence him, while Darman stepped in and checked him for comlinks. Fi was now right behind them in the other speeder, shielding the tussle from view. Unlike the Holovids, there was no quick blow to the head to render someone conveniently unconscious while you made your getaway, with no harm done beyond a headache when they regained consciousness. This was just a poor cop, like any of Obram's team. He'd stopped the wrong man at the wrong time. Darman's eyes met Nina's, and he knew he should have simply shot the cop as his instinct told him to, but he couldn't. Bai stepped in and rifled through the array of weapons on the officer's belt. Ah, he said, the only word spoken in the whole incident, and selected a stun baton. He shoved it into the cop's armpit. It crackled just as Nina let go of him. The man stopped struggling and convulsed a couple of times. "There," said Phi. He hauled the officer onto the curb, where he slumped in a heap, hidden from the oncoming traffic by the other speeder. "Sorry about that, Sarge." "It's okay. I broke contact before I got a shock. Time to bang out fast." "Sorry." Damian jumped back into the passenger seat. There was more traffic around than he expected, but Niner shot straight out into it and burned toward the city exit. "Sorry, I should have." "No harm done," Niner said. Phi overtook them and disappeared into the distance. Damian took out his DC-15 and kept it cradled in his lap, checking in the rear view until they were clear of the city limits. He was starting to worry that he'd lost his nerve. He'd never hesitated over taking a shot before. His thought process wasn't supposed to kick in and start arguing with the risk assessment. "I could have compromised this mission, and that means I put my brothers at risk. If you shot him, it would have been another mess to clean up," Nina said, veering away from the road and weaving through the trees. "Can't leave civvy cops dead all over the place. It's not Galactic City, is it?" "You're telepathic, Sarge." "I was thinking what Scarata would have said, actually. We've still left a cop in Iat who's seen us up close. Well, next time he sees us, we'll have our helmets on. So a fast lot of good that'll do him." Aiden and Phi were already waiting in the makeshift ops room when they reached the rebel camp, which appeared to be in darkness like the rest of the base. All the windows were shielded by blackout material. Inside the fragile-looking house, the two of them were sitting at the table and gazing forlornly at a datapad, and Aiden had his hand held against his ear, as if he was concentrating on a signal he could barely hear. Phi didn't look up. Aiden did. "Wow, you're good," the Knoll said wearily. "How many stiffs have you racked up tonight?" "2 troopers and a cop." "You're going to beat your own dumb record at this rate." "We never killed a cop," Nina said. Phi simply looked over his shoulder at them. I didn't plan to. Stun batons are tricky things if you don't know the medical history of your target." "Oh, great, great." Phi tapped his datapad and a crackling stream of audio filled through the room. It was voice traffic from a police control room, judging by the jargon of encodes. "Say again, 3-7. Last call shown on the onboard log was a vehicle stop on Bidian Way. No clear surveillance holocam view available. Confirm ID on the suspect speeder. Rental. Fake identichip. Used to secure it." "Hey, did anyone know he had a heart problem?" Phi silenced it again and got up. "Aten's digging a hole. I'll go and help him. I'm good at digging holes. Really deep ones." Aiden shrugged and went back to listening to the circuit. "I think the cops get excited when they found the stun baton burn on their buddy." Joining up the dots to work out that it was actually a covert commando team, cleaning up a spillage is a step too far for them, thankfully. He leaned backward as far as his chair would go and grabbed another datapad. Now take a look at these aerial images. Dunman took the pad, but Nina was still focused on the previous issue. So, Sergeant, what would you have done differently? I'd have shot the cop, said Aiden. And that would have solved the problem? How exactly? It wouldn't have changed a thing. It just worries me that you put being nice before doing the job right. We do extreme stuff. That means some unlikely saps get caught as collateral damage. Deal with it. Darman knew Aiden was right, and he was troubled by the fact that he'd hesitated. He was reacting to an internal template of police as jailer Obram's kind, allies, comrades, friends, and it was wholly wrong in a recipe for disaster at some point in the future. He couldn't afford to judge anyone by the uniform. He couldn't even assume all Jedi were on his side now. If he found out that Zay was tasking special operations personnel to deal with deserters like that, he wasn't sure how he'd take it. I realize you're the explosive ordnance man, Aiden said, but can't you manage to interpret aerial images? Darman jerked out of his thoughts. Okay, well. Darman stared at the flat images of what looks like the two-dimensional map of a city, with a crone that showed it was recorded a few hours earlier. It was part of Iyat, not as a schematic of the construction that the Merits had worked on, but a real image. He could see tiny dots moving along roads. A large compound in the heart of the city was packed full of repulsor trucks and armored vehicles of various types that hadn't been there a few days earlier when Omega was inserted. There was even mobile anti-air cannon. He handed the datapad to Nina for inspection. They're getting ready for our visit then. Aiden nodded. No doubt their Sept allies have aerial reconnaissance of the accumulation of Republic souvenirs we've given the lizards. We can both spy on each other when we know where to look. So Yet was bracing for a Merit assault. Other cities, Domin asked, all doing the same. I'm not sure if they understand how the lizards here cascade things, but it's unlikely they'll know about Leveler until she's looking for a parking space. A warship had been identified to deploy to Gaftakar. Then it was imminent, Leveler. With a few thousand of the Republic's finest embarked, 35th Infantry and 10th Armored, just to soften up Iyat and a few other major cities to allow the Merits to move in, then pull out when the dust has settled. Iyat wasn't well defended at all. From what Darman had seen, even one ship was overkill. Shenier Mining has enough resources to roll over Iyat and the government on its own without any military support if it wants to strip mine the place that badly. Yeah, but you know how companies like to look like they've been invited illegally, or else people scream that it's corporate invasion. It is corporate invasion, Daman said. Maybe there's some strategy, some big picture we're not privy to, Aiden said. But in the end, all wars are about someone wanting something the other guys got. If I thought that throwing a Hydra spanner in the works would change the nature of the galaxy, I'd do it. But this is the way life works, chum. Let's just do the job and hope we stay alive long enough to move on. Nina didn't seem bothered. He looked much more interested in the Reese data. Tommen left the two sergeants to their own devices, retrieved his entrenching tool from his backpack, and went in search of Phi and Atin. In the quiet night air, it was easy to follow the sound of a shovel biting into the soil, with that familiar metallic shinking sound. Phi and Atin, totally silent, were hacking away in a clearing fringed by small bushes, somewhere that roots would be less of a problem. Domin paused to look at the two bodies, and joined in the digging by the faint shielded light of a glow rod laid on the ground. 2 meters was deeper than it sounded. The three of them eventually stopped to stare down into the pit. "Should we have dug 2 graves?" Aiden asked. Sergeant Cal said that Mando Aid use communal graves if they bury at all. Daman racked his brain, trying to remember what else Crider had taught them about disposing of fallen comrades. He didn't care about what the books said about concealing signs they'd ever been there. This was about respect for men who were one simple designation prefix away from being him. And no soldier wants to be separated from his brothers. Unless they're particularly decutla, Phi said. Atten squatted down over the bodies. "Okay, let's roll them in. Can't we lower reverently instead?" Tommen went over to the pile of purple armor and pried the ID tallies from the breastplate. When he ran his pocket sensor over them, they gave him the readouts: CT 6200-8901 and CT 0368-7766. There was no indication of what they actually called each other, of course. The Grand Army didn't give a Motla's shebs about how clones like to be addressed, on the record at least. He did what he'd been avoiding for the last few hours, and interrogated the copy of the Knowles database that Ordo had given them all back on 000. Once he knew their real names, he would feel even worse. But he needed to if he was going to give them any sort of farewell rite. They're Maz and Olun. And this was the worst bit. Jang trained them at one time. If Maz and Olun had harbored any ambitions beyond surviving the war, Jang might have been the only one who knew what they were. Those dreams probably didn't include getting killed by another clone. Vayan Aten lowered them into the pit, still wrapped. Ni sukui ga kererek, ni prolatai ga darusun. Damin said, it was the ritual remembrance of those who'd passed on, recited daily with the names of all the people the mourner committed himself to immortalizing. I'm still alive, you're dead. I'll remember you, so you're eternal. Sergeant Cal said that Mendereed got straight to the point, even in spiritual matters. Maz and Alun. Vi threw a few handfuls of dirt into the pit, then picked up his shovel. You know you've got to recite that every day for the rest of your life now, don't you? I know, said Dumman, pitching loose soil back into the grave. And how many more names by the time this war is over? It wasn't going to be hard to remember them. it was going to be much, much harder to forget. Ore Terminal, Kirith City, Bog 5, 478 days after Geonosis. Trileks were much heavier than they looked. Maybe it was the Leku, because that tissue had to be pretty dense. Or maybe they were all muscle. Either way, it took a little more effort than Sev expected to restrain one. My, he said, grabbing Lebchira in the headlock and slamming him into the warehouse wall. You get around, don't you, delivery boy? The Trilek hit the permacrete slabs with a loud, wet grunt, and Sev was sure he had a good grip on him, until the pilot struggled free and made a run for it across the pitch-black landing strip. It was always a challenge when you couldn't immobilize targets the quick way, but Delta needed this one alive and talking. Sev tracked him in his night vision visor. A speed-blurred green figure with headtails flapping as he ran. Coming your way, Fixer. Lev ran full tilt toward his ship on the freight pad, and Sev raced after him. One downside of Catan armor was that it was heavy. Okay for short, panicky sprints, but over any distance it slowed a man down. And Lev was opening the gap between them. No problem. Fixer and Squash were rating. The Trilek cannoned him into a solid wall of Commando plastoid, and these as the two men intercepted him the hard way. Sev heard the oof of air expelled from his lungs. Leb was knocked flat on his back, before being hauled upright and pinned between Fixer and Scorch. I know Sev's weird, pal, but it's rude to run away when he tries to be sociable. Scorch could put a charmingly menacing lair into his voice that Sev couldn't emulate. His gloved fingers tightened slowly on the Trilek's neck. He doesn't mean to bite. He's just being playful. What do you want? Leb gasped, getting his breath back. I've done nothing. I'm all legit. Who are you? Anyway, Mandalorians? 'Cause I've... Boss ambled across the landing strip. Don't break anything. General on deck. He tilted his head to indicate that Sev should look behind him. Barca, on your 6. Very anxious to do some interrogating. Leb, now's the time to enjoy the hospitality of the Republic, Scorch said, hauling the Trilek bodily toward Delta's traffic interdiction vessel. We just want to ask you a few harmless questions about your itinerary. Yeah, the questions might be harmless, but you're not. Leb now looked past Scorch and spotted Jusek jogging across the permacrete, Jedi robes flapping. Oh yeah, now the Jedi's going to zap me with his force powers, isn't he? Shove a lightsaber in. Jusek caught up with them. He always looked as if a strong breeze would knock him over. No lightsaber necessary, my friend. You haven't got any reason to withhold information, have you? When Jusek used that especially quite reasonable tone, and he never raised his voice anyway, Sev wasn't sure if he was using Jedi mind influence or not. There was always something disturbing about Jedi, even the approachable ones, like Jusek. Sergeant Vow said it was a good idea never to turn your back on one. They weren't like regular folks. Would I know if he was using that mind stuff on me? Seth thought about that more and more lately. He still liked Jusek, though. It was a tight fit in the TIV crew compartment now. 4 armored commandos, a scared Trilak, and General Jusek. And Leb seemed not to realize it was hard to give a prisoner a good hiding in such a confined space. His eyes went from visor to visor. He really didn't have a clue who they were. But then, very few beings ever got to see a Republic commando close up. And the helmet always seemed to bother them when they did. Eye contact was everything for most humanoid species. Without it, they couldn't gauge how much trouble they were in. So, you've been delivering specialist equipment shipped in from Arcania, Boss said. And you don't have a permit for it. I don't need one, do I? You're from Ryloth, so you're a Republic citizen, and that makes trading in cloning equipment illegal. I'm not trading in anything, and I don't look in the crates. Arcania. They don't export fruit, do they? I'm a delivery boy, like you said. Your name showed up in the list we happen to have. Okay, arrest me then. Boss turned his head slowly to Sev. Is silent cue to play the heavy? Jusek just watched impassive. We don't do arrests, Sev said. We get answers. Give us one, and we'll go away. Or I'll be very upset. Sev could make his knuckles crack alarmingly, just by closing his fist. Tell me where you took the consignment. Leb's gaze wandered to the hatch as if he was calculating what he'd have to do to escape. Maybe it was just a reflex. His legs were moving slightly in some wordless reaction. Why is everyone so interested in this stuff? Is it really glitterism or something? The Mandalorians asked me the same thing. Where I took it. I thought it was just vats and permacrete and stuff. What Mandalorians? 3 of them. 1 young, 2 older. Judging by the voices. 'Cause they have helmets like you, don't they? And they were wearing... Jusek cut in, suddenly very intent on the question. Green armor. They wore dark green armor, didn't they? Leb blinked. Yeah. He defocused for a moment as if he was trying to visualize something. Yeah, they wore dark green. How did you know? A hunch, Jusek said. Sev was almost pushed aside now. Whatever Jusek had on his mind, whatever intel he hadn't shared it with them. He busted a gut to get here, though. I can work out who they are. Now tell me where you took the equipment, Taruma. Jusek leaned back as if he had his answers. As if the identity of whoever else had shaken down Leb mattered more to him than the delivery destination. Kosai's likely location. Sev was distracted by that, trying to construct a scenario in which that information mattered more. You want to pin that down? Boss asked and indicated Sev. Or do I let my colleagues ask you? Tropics Island Resort. Leb sounded fluent, as if he'd rehearsed it. Or at least given the same answers before. You want the coordinates? Here they are. He put his hand inside his tunic and froze. Hey, it's just a data pad. Take it easy. Sev realized he must have looked as if he was going to hit him. He wondered how he managed to give the impression of being more violent than his brothers. Because any armored commando with a D's looked like bad news. He wasn't trying to act like a psycho. Whatever build-up Boss gave him, but folks didn't feel comfortable sharing a space with him. And whatever he intended didn't seem to affect that. I'll take the data, Jusek said quietly. He held his hand out for Leb's datapad, tapped the controls and keyed something into his own device. Then he handed it back. Hey, Leb stared at his datapad in horror. You erased it. I'm so clumsy, Jusek said. Come on. Let's see you safely on your way, shall we? But my data. Jusek crooked his finger at Sev to accompany him, and they bundled Leb out of the Tiv so fast that he almost fell out of the hatch. The two of them held on to an arm each and steered him toward his freighter. Don't I get some creds for my trouble, Leb said. Jusek slapped something into his palm. Not just that, citizen. I'll make the problem disappear too. He stared into the Twi'lek's face and put his hand flat on his chest for a moment. In a few minutes, things will be back to normal for you. Now off you go. Leb stood at the foot of the ladder, up to his cockpit, and seemed to be contemplating the contents of his palm as Jusek and Sev jogged back to the Tiv. There was a small, anonymous-looking shuttle a little distant from it, one that Sev had seen Jusek use before. What did you give him, sir? Sev asked. A few hundred creds and a spot of amnesia. What? I mind-rubbed him. Oh. You can do that, too, can you? No point deleting the records on his datapad if he remembers them and remembers us. There was a low rumble behind them. Sev turned to see Leb's ships powering up, driving clouds of dust and grit into the air, with a downdraft of its thrusters. But whoever's after Kosai can still find him, except he won't be able to give them an answer this time. So how does that solve his problem? I didn't say it would solve his, Jusek said, but it certainly solves some of ours. It wasn't very Jedi of him. But then maybe Sev didn't fully understand their beliefs. What about those Mandalorians? You sounded like you knew something. Jusek shrugged and opened the hatch on his shuttle with a gesture of his hand. It might have been some force trick or simply a remote control. Let's just say Kosai's in demand. But who are they? Competition. I'll catch up with you later. Sev accepted need to know, even if it annoyed him. He watched Jusek disappear into the shuttle, and rejoined Delta into the Tiv, trying to work out what he felt about Mandalorians, and whatever they were all like him. The generals scrambled the Twi'lek's brains, he said, slumping into a seat and fastening his restraining belt for takeoff. So he isn't going to be discussing his travel arrangements with anyone else, at least. Boz started in annoyance. We should have asked him for a bit more detail about where he did the drop, but Jusek seemed really keen to get rid of him. Well, he knows something we don't. Nobody said it, but Sev knew they were thinking it. Mandalorians. It was always sobering to run into them, or the mention of them, and find they were on the Separatist side, or not, or on no side at all, but not the Republic's allies, like most of the commandos. Delta Squad had been raised and trained by Mandalorian sergeants. Men like Ralon Val had done with generations of Mando fathers had done, raising their sons to be self-sufficient warriors, passing on a Mandalorian culture that made strong, tight-knit armies. Yeah, but there's Mando and there's Mando. Is that me? Is that who I really am? And how do real Mandos see us? Omega was very Mando now. All Scarata's squads were. He was a really hardliner, old Cal. All traditions, emotional sentimentality. And if anyone got in his way, complete no-holds-barred violence. Sometimes Sev preferred Val's cold distance, because it was for their own good. But there were times he envied Omega. Val said Scarata was too soft, and made weak soldiers. But all Sev saw was someone who he didn't have to be afraid of, and who would let him make mistakes. Too late to think about that now. Okay, Daruma it is, said Boss. Hope you packed the swimwear, Fixer. Tropics Island Resort, Daruma Kularan System. 478 days after Geonosis. Tropics was a manufactured paradise, with every facility a sun-seeking visitor might want, and as far from Scarata's idea of bliss as he could imagine. It was all bright colors, noise, and heat. Lulari trees imported from Hikil tinkled like wind chimes in the breeze, and their heady scent was pungent enough to give him the start of a headache. Mud bolted along the shell-paved beachfront path ahead of Val, wiping its tail and whimpering with excitement as it picked up strange new scents. It was a separatist planet, at least as far as the Kularan system was self-loyal. Scarata felt everywhere was enemy territory, regardless of whether it was red, blue, or yellow on the charts, and didn't let the stereotyped idol weaken his guard. Well, this is classy, he said. Beings of various species lounge on a white sand beach, lapped by a turquoise sea so vividly blue that it could have been dyed. Trilec waitresses whose skin almost matched its wandered among the vacationers with trays of drinks. Droids trundled between waking sand and somehow managing to leave no tracks behind them. Imagine being stuck here for 2 weeks. What do you reckon, America? Morel shrugged. Out of armor, in a plain white shirt and beige pants. He suddenly looked so ordinary, so civilian, that Scarata could only think of all the routine things he was denied. I could probably find something to occupy me, Myrtle said. Do you realize how much you look like glitter stem dealers? Val looked back over his shoulder, a rather splendid pearl-inlaid blaster shimmering in his holster. I'm going for the casual but menacing look. Glad I pulled it off. Is there Erekide special, Ralon. Says more about you than credits ever can. The gangster look was less conspicuous here than full Mandalorian armor. The idea was to look like they'd come for sports fishing, so that submerging Ayahan offshore didn't attract the wrong sort of interest. Looks rather expensive. Another bauble from the Vow deposit box. My great-grandfather is said to have shot a servant with it for serving his calf too hot. Scarata almost went for the bait. You're just saying that to make me mad, aren't you? Val's expression was unreadable. You know I'd never do such a thing. Morel put a restraining hand on Scarata's shoulder as he overtook him. The terrible thing about Val and his family was that it was perfectly possible. Instead, Scarata tried to concentrate on the inexplicably generous Val. The man who just given him millions for the frankly sentimental and unselfish purpose of rescuing clones, rather than the sadistic martinet who'd nearly killed Atin to toughen him up. Udesi, Mera muttered. Take it easy, Calbia. Scarata did his best. He took a deep breath as he walked into the lobby of the resort's huge hotel complex and focused on being a Glitterstim baron on a short break. He was a nondescript, short, gray-haired, middle-aged man who could pass unnoticed as a vagrant in the right clothes or bring a room to a halt simply by walking with a great degree of swagger. Today he could play a prince. He had a fortune in the safe on board Ayahan. So thinking like the idle and disreputable rich was easy. He was both. A taller female wreck looked down at him. Scarata had seen them working as bounty hunters. Their ultra-thin, whip-like bodies came in handy for assessing awkward locations, but it was a surprise to come across one in the hospitality business. This one didn't appear to have a sense of humor. He decided to skip the diet jokes. Do we need a permit for angling here, ma'am? Scarata asked innocently. We've come for the Riffies fishing. Yes, she said. Not exactly personifying, hospitable. She fixed him with a disturbing purple eye. Are you guests? No. We have a marine vessel moored here. Well, there'll be a fee for berthing. Do you wish to hire tackle too? We've come very well prepared, thanks. And you'll have to sign a waiver, because Tropics Resorts cannot be held responsible for any death, injury, damage, or other untoward incident caused by or relating to hunting, fishing, or exploration in any area more than 10 meters offshore, or beyond a depth of 50 meters. Scarata smiled indulgently, waste of time though it was, and took out a stylus. We're used to taking risks, ma'am. Where do I sign? How long will this permit need to cover? How long to find the hiding hole that Kosai had created for herself? Maybe hours, maybe days. If they were unlucky, weeks. And when they found it, there was always a chance that the Iowa bait would have moved on again. Give me a week's pass, Scarlett said, slapping his credit chip on the desk. If we find we have more time to kill, I'll extend it. The wreck checked the chip in the scanner. Thank you, Master Nissin. Scarza flinched at the bogus ID. I must advise caution if you fish beyond the 500-meter limits. We do have people go missing from time to time when they ignore the warnings. But that's part of the appeal for many anglers and divers who come here. Bao did his icy I know something you don't smile. Sports fishing isn't sport unless you run the risk of being caught yourself, is it? There's always relaxing on the beach, said the wreck, or a pleasant walk around the harbor. She seemed to have classed them as two old guys trying to rediscover their youth through destructive machismo. Maybe with Morel as the fit young minder who could hold them out of trouble. It was perfect. Whoever Kosai had as a contact here, and she'd need one, if only to get hold of supplies, wouldn't be tipped off to the fact that Mandalorian bounty hunters were in town. Airhunt didn't look too conspicuous on one of the pontoons that stretched out into the azure water. Most of the vessels alongside showed no signs of ever having slipped their moorings. But there were a few more rugged craft that were clearly from off-world. Scarata took out his datapad and aimed at the scanner discreetly in their direction to check the passive transponders, just in case. He found no registrations. That worried him. You have to hand it to the investment group here, he said, as they tried to look casual. They take a disaster and turn it into a USP. You're so crass, Var muttered. What's a USP? Mura asked. Unique selling point, son. As in they made a complete shook when they terraformed the place. Not knowing just what kind of wildlife was in the ice when they thawed the planet. There are some real nasties looking underwater, but instead of saying, "Oh, that's too dangerous," let's scrub the resort idea. The tourist board touts it as an opportunity for wild adventure. I have to respect that kind of resilience in business. Mura smiled to himself until the lawsuits come rolling in. Just operating costs, Scar said. Overheads. The three men climbed onto Ayahan and sat on the flat section of her casing, backs resting against the curve of the port cargo bay, looking out to sea. Mert sat with its nose pointing into the wind, sniffing happily. Scarata didn't know a lot about sport angling, although he could manage to catch fish if he ever had to, and he hoped there wasn't some giveaway sign of a real angler that was conspicuously missing. If push came to shove, he could always play the stim baron on his first fishing trip. The Iowa bait has to have a resupply route, he said. She can't just go to ground here and have no contact with anyone. How does she get her food? She's not the kind that lives off the land. She's used to having minions. Sea, said Miro. What? Live off the sea, not the land. Well, Kaminoran's disciplined or not, She has to eat something. Let's do a little exploring, said Val. We have the chart, Oya Mud. Mud stood up, paws slipping on the smooth hull, and looked around frantically at the command to hunt. The strill couldn't sense any prey. Val leaned over and ruffled its loose folds of gold fur, pointing at the water. Strills could fly and glide, but swimming wasn't their forte. Mud rumbled with disappointed frustration. It's okay, Mud. I'll let you hunt Kaminisi soon, Scarza said. He wondered if he was getting soft. He'd always disliked the animal, even if he couldn't blame it for its savagery, giving a master like Val. Now he saw its talents, if not its charm. Soon, okay? Mud's eyes had that focus and intensity that suggested it understood Scarza perfectly, and it settled down again with its huge head in Val's lap. Morel slid his sun visor into its place and leaned back against the curve of the hull, fingers meshed behind his head. Let's narrow down the search range first, he said, pointing. Look, check out the speed. Moving across the harbor, well within the safe turquoise shallows, was a powered barge with a quarter divers getting ready to explore the underwater world, wearing a bizarre array of brightly colored swimwear that said they didn't dive for a living. The whole looked like the barges tied up on nearby pontoons in Tropics Resort's livery. This was what the staff here used to get around the perfectly planned, ideally spaced island chain. And this was what the Trilec must have used to move Gosai's equipment and droids out to sea. If they worked out the speed the barges could cruise and factored in the weight of the cargo the Trilec had delivered, they'd get a radius within which to search. Scarata aimed his datapad, lying it flat on his knee and letting it track the barge. I was never very good at this. It was just a matter of timing it across a set distance, using the datapad like one of those gizmos that CSF sometimes use to track speeders. Well, I make that 15 clicks an hour. Morel slid along the hull and checked over his shoulder. So that means if the barge went out to some RV point and returned in half an hour, we are looking at a maximum range of maybe 10 clicks. If it was moving faster, and that's being optimistic, let's take the search out to the 15-click radius then, just to be sure. Val keyed in the data and projected the holocharts onto the hull. This is 3-dimensional, remember. A concave relief chart formed like a mesh basket in blue light that was hard to see in the sunlight. That's the underwater topography in a 15-click radius from the coordinates the Trilec gave us. Even in these lighting conditions, Scarata could see the indentations of cave mouths under the waterline. The charts only went down as far as 50 meters. It was as good a place as any to start looking. Who did the hydrography for the developers? Merla asked. They put that 50-meter limit in for a reason, because they must have known what was below it. They didn't just stop looking because it was time for calf break. I don't think there's the equivalent of City Hall here, Scarata said. We can't just stroll in and ask the local planning chief if we can look through his database. That's the problem with commercially owned planets. Thou opened the top hatch and motioned Mert inside. Where's your spirit of adventure, Cal? Have overpriced deep water hybrid will explore? I got this tub for a good price. Insulting Scarata's ability to drive a deal was marginally worse than questioning his courage, and he realized Val had baited him yet again. And I wonder what you'd do with yourself if you didn't have me to torment. Val raised one eyebrow. Now that it was annoying dumb insolence. It really was. But Scarata ignored the impulse. Thought of the fortune Val had handed over to him, as if it were a credit ship he'd found on the street, and stood up Morel, slipped the mooring line, and prepared to get under way. The islands were constructed on the tops of natural peaks, jutting from the sea, like porcelain crowns on the stumps of teeth. Once submerged, it was simply a matter of doing what he'd do on land, if he was hunting an animal in a lair, looking for signs of activity, checking out cave mouths, and venturing inside. It was just a ruse, just a discreet dive to scope out the topography that wasn't shown on any of the charts, so they could come back later to stage a planned assault. But if an opportunity presented itself, they take it. Outside the transparent steel bubble that formed a clear dome over the cockpit, a tourist brochure of an underwater world drifted past them in vividly colored serenity. Mert seemed fascinated, pressing a snotty nose to the transparent steel, and making excited grumbling noises, and Scarata risked reaching out to hold the shrill back by its collar, and wiped the viewport clean. Filthy thing. But it has its uses, just like us. Val took the hint and beckoned to Mud to sit on his lap. Relations had differently relaxed between Scarata and Val. There was a time when they'd have brawled over less. Ayahan dropped below 60 meters, past the charted depth. The water was surprisingly clear. Lacy reeds swayed gracefully in the currents. Brilliant pink and yellow fish-like ribbons wove themselves between the fronds, flashing displays of lights like a croissant casino. That's more like it, Merrill said, sounding pleased. The navigation displays stripped away the layer of marine life and showed a three-dimensional landscape of slopes marked with fissures and channels that penetrated deep into the face of the submerged mountain, forming the one island within the 15-kilometer zone. Ayahan came alongside a deep shadow that appeared as a hole on the sensors. With a ping, said Morel. Let's just line up the sensors and see how far into the feature we can map. You okay with this, son? Yes, Calbia. He turned the vessel 90 degrees and pointed Ayahan's nose at the opening for a deep scan. Now that's a likely one. Goes back 100 meters at least. Mark that on the chart, please. Sergeant Val. He turned to Scarata. I'm several pages ahead of Odo in the manual now. There'd be a contest later. There'd be a contest later. Scarlett could tell. Ordo and Morel a double act right from the time he'd met them as 2-year-old clone kids. No names, just numbers. And already handling blasters. Sometimes indulged in a little rivalry and one-upmanship. It explained Morel's love to risk-taking. He had to edge out of Ordo's shadow somehow. They walked along the 30 kilometers of submerged coastline, checking the scanning cave after cave. Some were immediately obvious as dead ends, when the sonar scan was napped onto the three-dimensional view, just depressions in the rock that went nowhere. Some were so deep and twisted that the sonar didn't find an end, and those were marked. As Morel eased Erhan through the extraordinary forest of weed and marine creatures, some of which slapped sucker-like mouthparts onto the cockpit bubble as if testing the ship for flavor. Scarlett kept an eye out for signs of disturbance to the environment that might indicate recent constructions work. If Kosai was here, she'd only been in residence for a few months. Signs of activity might still be around. Fresh-cut rock face, debris from cave mouths, and a number of telltale signs that she'd had a hideaway built down here. The house stared out of the dome too, with Murd mirroring his posture as exactly as a six-legged animal ever could, blinking from time to time and pausing once or twice to turn and gaze at its master before giving him an enthusiastic and slobbery lick across the face with a dripping grey tongue. Scarlett shuddered. But at least there was one being in the galaxy that loved Val unconditionally. Fairfax. If he started feeling sorry for the Chakar after so many years, it was a bad sign. The fortune was just creds Val had no use for, Scarlett told himself. Something he wanted to deny his own privileged class, and that simply happened to be useful in the plan to rescue clones, an afterthought. It's not true, though, is it? He's a Mando too. The same thing that drew him to Mandalore is the same thing that kept me there. We chose it. Maybe I hate him because of the parts of him that are too much like me. All stop, Val said suddenly. Murd stiffened, always sensitive to Val's reactions. The shrill was hunting, even if it couldn't get out there and taste the scents and currents. Morel brought the ship to a halt, and she drifted silent except for the hum of the shields and environment controls. Val pointed ahead, slightly to port. In that reed forest, look. Ihon's exterior holocams trained in the directions of Val's finger and Murd's snout. The weed was thick and populated by shoals of glowing orange discs that could have been fish, worms, or swimming crustaceans. The impression was one of a Tepcaf courtyard, strung with decorative lights. Not all the reed was pale green. Some looked right in the aquamarine light. Scarlett strained to focus, and then a current moved the reed a little more, and he realized he wasn't looking at the reed at all, but bones. It was a skeleton. Shab, Mira muttered. I think we are too late for resuscitation, Calbia. I hope you bought travel insurance. Scarlet couldn't see any marks on the bone at this distance. Or she. Who died down here and why? The skeleton was swaying in the current as if dancing with the reed. It was definitely a humanoid of some kind, picked clean and as right as an anatomical specimen. Although a closer inspection, as close as they could get with it without leaving the vessel, showed a few colonies of pale yellow growths that looked like close shadows barnacles. It was hard to see what was holding it down. If the flesh was gone, the connective tissue that had held the bones together should have been gone too. Scarlett couldn't think of a species that fitted the bill, but it didn't matter. He or she wasn't going anywhere. Diver who ignored the hazard warnings, Val asked. Scarlett's instinct for bad signs was more reliable than any sonar. What kind of marine life eats a diving suit and apparatus, as well as the meat? Mara engrossed in the controls for the external security holocam, let out a long breath. And when did you last see a fish with fingers? He said, quietly switching the holocam image to one of the large monitors. Look. The close-up view of the weed bed that swayed around the skeleton's ankle like a deep pile carpet showed a splash of bright orange. As Morel magnified the image and went in for a close-up, Scarlett realized what it was. Morel was right. There weren't too many marine species that could take a length of fiber cord and secure a body to a rock. The close view on the monitor showed a knot. A competent, non-slipping textbook Keldabi anchoring bend. In a galaxy of loop rings, gription panels, and 100 high-tech ways of attaching things, few people bothered to learn to tie knots properly, let alone one as distinctive and complex as that. Very few people indeed. Only clone soldiers and Mandalorians.